Hi, I'm Bonnie Meyer. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm from Covington, Kentucky.
Hi, I'm Katie Meyer. I also use she, her pronouns, and I am from Covington, Kentucky.
I identify as queer, and it's been a journey, as it always is. So I originally came out as bisexual, and will still identify in some spaces as bisexual, but generally I identify as queer.
I identify as lesbian.
So I'm from here now. I think of Covington as my hometown at this point. I grew up in Northwest Ohio, and on a farm. I grew up in Northwest Ohio on a farm, actually on the opposite side of the county from Brooklyn Steel Tate. So Brooklyn and Michael and I are from the same general sort of area. So I grew up there, and in 1997, when my daughter was a year and a half old, I made the decision as a first generation college student to go to Miami University for a bunch of different reasons, but mostly because it just felt like a small community that I could get a start in with her. And I really haven't left since then. So I've been in Covington for 12 years. This is my 12th year. This is my 12th year in Covington. And it feels like the home that I was always supposed to be in. I came for her. So I lived in Oxford from essentially from 1997 until 2011 when we met, aside from about 2 years where I went back to Northwest Ohio. And I was outed as a high school English teacher, which is what will lead us into, I'm sure, other points of the conversation. But that experience is ultimately what led me back to Oxford and into the work that I've been doing since 2008. So, but lived in Oxford from 1997 to 2006. Moved back to Northwest Ohio for 2 years, and I was back in Oxford in 2008. So, but this is home.
I'm from Covington, born and raised, like fourth generation Covington. Yes, very, very, very much Covington. So I went to Covington Latin School, which is a small high school just down the road from the Pride Center here. And then after that, I graduated in 2000 and left for 10 years. So kind of college, grad school, traveling, and came back to Covington in 2010. I went to the University of Kentucky for my undergraduate degree, and then the New School in New York City for my master's, which is a great small school in Greenwich Village. I studied urban policy, analysis, and management. So after I got my master's, I spent some time teaching English in South America, and then I worked in state government in Frankfurt. And I came back when I was offered the job as Renaissance manager doing downtown revitalization in Covington in 2010.
We say, and maybe this is the right space for this. We say that we met because we were both involved in hate crimes, but very different sort of hate crimes. And so I'll just give a teeny bit of the story that is mine to tell. So I was outed as a high school English teacher in Northwest Ohio in my hometown, and it was awful. And it was through that I realized, because I think in many cases, for me, I was an 80s kid. So I didn't realize, especially growing up on a farm, that there were so many different people out there, and that there were other opportunities to be, authentic and genuine with who you are. So though I'd always understood without having the language that there was some sort of, bisexuality or queerness inside of me, I didn't know. And so ultimately what happened was I married the kid's father, the guy I met in high school after getting pregnant. and that's it really changed the trajectory of my life. But to skip ahead many years after that, as it was falling apart, I was outed, and he outed me. And it was awful. And so I ended up back at Miami University, where I found wonderful mentors and had a lot of support and was really empowered in my queer identity. I got very involved in the efforts that were happening on the campus when I was in my doctoral program. I got involved with Equality Ohio. I was on the board of Equality Ohio at that point. And my best friend, Jose, and I were talking about how we needed to get out of Oxford and we needed to be in Cincinnati and we needed to be in Covington. We loved hanging out in Covington and Cincinnati and just being more involved. And so I created, back in 2011, a Facebook page called Queers for Solidarity that is, I think, still up and not active. And the idea behind Queers for Solidarity was just, this should be 365 days a year. Pride is amazing. Pride is awesome. But, at that point in 2011, we were talking about workers' rights, and we were talking about a lot of unrest in a lot of different places. And we were talking in Oxford, we were talking about unions, and we were talking a lot about how queer issues are everybody's issues, and everybody's issues are queer issues. We're part of all of these communities. And so I created this Facebook page and started doing a little bit of work in Cincinnati, primarily Cincinnati, and popped up in Covington a couple of times. And then Katie got on the Queers for Solidarity page and posted about this event that she was hosting in Covington in response to something that had happened, and wanting to just really take over the community and show that Covington is a place where LGBTQA plus people were accepted. And so I said to Jose that we needed to go and we needed to support this. And we drove down and we were 30 minutes late, and he made me go inside anyway. And we walked inside and then we met, and that was it. There are people in Covington. The current city manager of the city of Covington was sitting in that meeting when we met. There were so many people we know because they were friends of hers, and I had no idea that they were her friends. I thought I was walking into a restaurant or something with a lot of people, and we were walking into a meeting space where there were like 10 of you, and everybody knew her. And it's like Jose and me, and that was it for us, basically.
Yeah.
And that we were married a year later, and that was 12 years ago. So.
Talk about fulfilling a stereotype.
It's true. There actually was a U-Haul involved. Like a couple months later.
Yeah.
But we met because you were organizing.
We were coming home from a night out, and had a run-in with this person who was yelling hateful things at us, and then he started chasing one of my friends and just started engaging in violence. And there were a number of bystanders who kind of came to the rescue, ended up getting stabbed in the neck and across the stomach, and kind of turned into a really violent situation really quickly. He ended up, going to jail, but through the court process, it was the first official hate crime charge in Kenton County at the time, which was 2010. And it was the combination of the hateful rhetoric he used and the violence afterwards. Interestingly, if you're interested in how hate crime legislation works, they ultimately overturned that hate crime several years later because the felony assaults were against bystanders. So the individuals who ended up getting really hurt in that fight, for lack of a better term, were not part of the LGBT community. So even though that's what started the entire interaction, the hate crime legislation was removed. The hate crime designation was removed from his trial. And so he served 9 years. And is now back here in the community. So hopefully doing much better. So anyway, so we went through all of that, and I know in my heart that Covington is an inclusive community. At the time, we had already passed the Fairness Ordinance back in 2003. We had an out LGBT city council member. We had Rosie's and Yada Club and Bar 32, which was 701 at the time, and Blue Bar. Leap and Lizard. We had so many queer spaces. This was just a community that I felt very like we were on the right side of the community. This particular person was not. And so we organized an event called Covington's Night Out. and it was to reclaim that space, which is at the corner of Pike and Main down here. It's a gas station. So we had all of the bars, the LGBT bars and inclusive spaces through parties, and we kind of created this path so that we would all walk through these spaces and reclaim it as a safe part of our community. So I organized Covington's Night Out and was looking for volunteers, and she volunteered.
I showed up.
And that's how it goes. That's how it went.
No.
So I'm very sorry that happened for a number of reasons, but you know, there was a positive side. Yeah, we did balloons and rainbow, all these rainbow balloons all throughout the space. It was quite a production, but it was, it was just so clear. That was organized on a very short timeline. I think we had 700 or 800 people come out. So I think that was when it became even more clear that Covington was on this path to be clear that they're an LGBT inclusive community. That was Covington's Night Out as the event happened for the first time in October of 2010.
And does it happen?
We did it again in 2011, but I think at that point it kind of evolved into what is now Northern Kentucky Pride.
Yeah. So
Northern Kentucky Pride existed at that time, but we were involved in Covington's Night Out and then sort of shifted our energy to Northern Kentucky Pride.
Yep. So it was the following year that we were both involved then with Northern Kentucky Pride, which would have been year 3 of our event. I certainly think Covington has always been, I don't know that I want to say always, because I can't talk about, we've been here for 2 decades or 200 years or something. We had a bicentennial, 200 years. Covington's been around for a long time. I felt when I came to Covington, I always felt like Covington was really inclusive and just kind of quiet about it. I felt like Covington has always been a kind of a place where we don't necessarily over celebrate. You know, we are who we are, and we care about our community, and we're trying to take care of each other. And for me, coming from, at that point, coming from Ohio, and spending a bunch of time in Cincinnati and also in Covington, I really loved the community that I found in Covington.
Yeah, growing up here, I think I remember when my parents next door, at the time my next door neighbors moved in. Gosh, I had to have been maybe 10 or 11, and they were a same-sex couple, 2 men. Joe and Elsie. And
I talked to them.
Did you really? Yes. And it was nothing. It was for me and maybe just my family and my neighborhood. There was no sort of like, oh, guess who moved next door? It was sort of like, oh, Joe and Elsie, nice to meet them. And I think over the years, we had multiple same-sex couples living in the neighborhood, which is Old Seminary Square, and nobody really. We were just a great community there. But to Bonnie's point, I think that was kind of understated. It was just we knew that we had some of those cultural centers, and by that I mean like Rosie's and 701, 32, Yada Club, and all of the iterations that's been. But the city government wasn't so loud and proud as they are today. Today, it's very intentional. There's a lot of communication. There's been policy work done. They did that fairness ordinance in 2003, which was a big deal. Mm-hmm. One of the first cities in Kentucky to do that, and having out elected. There were actually a lot of city commissioners in the past who were part of the LGBT community. They just didn't talk about it. Mm-hmm. But, you can kind of look back and see a lot of history among the city's leadership that was part of the LGBT community. And then continuing on today, including a couple folks on city commission, as well as the city manager and economic development director. And, it's a very queer city.
And I can say the city of Covington, and I don't know if this is something that'll come up later or not, but they're so intentional about the support. And this is coming out of like the economic development department. They're just the intentionality behind the support of what's happening beyond the the Pride Festival and that one day a year, but how can the city make sure that LGBTQA plus people feel and know that they're welcome here. We've had an LGBTQ liaison on the police force for many years, and the city they're just so proactive in their support of the LGBTQA plus community, and some of that's been definitely noted. I think over the last 6 to 8 weeks with some of the legislation issues in Kentucky.
I'll be honest, I was living in Lexington in 2003. I do remember attending at one point one fairness meeting at somebody's house in Licking Riverside where people were really starting to try to drum up support for this. I believe that it wasn't overly contentious, although there are better people to speak to it than I am. But I will say that in 2010, following the hate crime, the city reaffirmed their commitment and made an official proclamation and event to say, like, we stand by fairness and, just continuing to be supportive in that way. We were the third city, right?
We were the third city.
So Lexington, Louisville came before us.
Yep. I can't speak to either of those in 2003. I was teaching high school in Trenton, Ohio. I was in 2003. I just started teaching. This is my 20th year in education. So I don't know that we know. I can talk a lot about fairness over the years. We've had a huge part in just, I think, the energy and the efforts around fairness in Northern Kentucky and where we saw, but between 2003 and 2004, I always felt, and I love Ohio. I grew up in Ohio. I love Cincinnati. It's part of what drew me to this area. I always felt like Covington was more inclusive to the LGBTQA plus community. And I just really, and I still do in a lot of ways. And I think situations change, and certainly elected officials change, and the demographics change. There's a lot of changes that can impact that. But I can speak to somebody who was living in Oxford in 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, and always feeling like, when I had the opportunity to visit Covington, especially in those 2008, 2009, 2010 years, I spent a lot of time at below zero, a lot of time at below zero. But I loved coming to Covington because I think it feels a little bit different. We're a smaller city. People tend to know each other here in all of the spaces a bit better. I think that there's something about that smaller community, but I've always felt like the people in Covington had our backs as the LGBTQA plus community, and perhaps that comes with just being a part of a smaller city. But that was just how I felt when I entered the community 12 years ago. So,
yeah, I do have that local government lens of having worked in local government, and I remember when the city of Cincinnati started getting the 100% on the HRC Municipal Equality Index, and how impressive I thought that was. At the policy level, that the city government was doing that work. I think, it feels very localized how LGBT inclusive Cincinnati feels based on the neighborhood and based on, the concentration of a couple businesses or that have been proudly sharing their rainbow flags or supporting LGBT events, obviously like Northside. And the history of Cincinnati Pride in Northside, kind of always felt that as soon as you got into Northside. I don't know that because Cincinnati is so much bigger, you get that in every neighborhood, right? It just kind of depends. But I do think when you're usually in those small local business districts in Cincinnati, whether or not historically they have been LGBT inclusive, you kind of see this like movement towards that, like that. There's more and more of that support, and you can see it visually when you visit.
Northern Kentucky is a pretty big span of space. So when we're talking about the fairness ordinances, there are 24 fairness ordinances in Kentucky now. That is 23 cities and 1 county. And it was Lexington and Louisville and Covington. Those were the first 3 cities. I think it was Louisville and then Lexington and then Covington. And then there was nothing for 10 years. And then Vico, Kentucky passed, the smallest town in the entire United States, to pass a fairness ordinance. And it was because their mayor is gay, but was the mayor at the time and was gay. And also the hairdresser and the nail salon. He has a hair salon literally right down the street. It's an amazing story.
It's in Eastern Kentucky.
Eastern Kentucky, tiny little town in coal mining in southeastern Kentucky. But they passed a fairness ordinance, and that really started some momentum. But that was still in 2013. We didn't see another fairness ordinance here until 2018. But it was really after the city of Covington stood up and made that charge. And I think that's the thing about the city of Covington is they are bold in their affirmation. I think they're radically inclusive affirmation of the LGBTQ+ community. And it is this administration, but this has been the case since, like we've said, 2003. All of our mayors have come in and supported the LGBTQA community that I know of since 2003. But the city of Covington is the sponsor of our community awards. We started a community awards event a couple of years ago. And it was at that event that actually it was Tom West, who's the economic development director, stood up and issued a charge to the rest of Northern Kentucky cities, because we had Covington, and at that point we had Maysville that had passed a fairness ordinance as well in 2018, but we were the only river city that had a fairness ordinance up until that point. And so we really saw the city of Covington encouraging, pushing, and I think in some cases even shaming other cities across Northern Kentucky to stand up and do the right thing for their LGBTQA+ folks, the people living in their city, pushing back on chambers, like pushing in business spaces and saying we need to be bold about affirming the LGBTQA+ community. And it was after that, obviously a lot of work that we had been doing. I spent time in Park Hills. We were doing a lot of work. But at that point, we really saw a shift. And then we saw a string of 10 fairness ordinances passed. So if you look at the fairness ordinances now, like I said, there are 24 in Kentucky, and 12 of those are here in Northern Kentucky. So half of the fairness ordinances. And I think
can you do them?
I can get pretty close.
Covington,
Louisville, and Lexington.
No, not all 24, just the 12.
Oh, the 12. And so it was Covington, and then it was Maysville, and then it was Dayton. And Bellevue, and Fort Thomas, and Crescent Springs, and Crescent Springs. What's the other Springs?
Not another Springs.
There's a Springs. It's Crescent Springs.
It's Crestview Hills.
Crestview Hills. Highland Heights. Ellesmere. Who am I missing? Augusta.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Did you say Newport?
I think I did. Did I say Newport?
Oh, wow.
Newport. Covington. Maysville. Dayton. I'm trying to go in order. Dayton. Bellevue. Crescent Springs. Highland Heights. Newport.
Ellesmere.
Ellesmere was the last one.
Crestview Hills.
Crestview Hills.
And then Augusta was before.
Augusta.
There's 11. You lost one.
I lost one.
You're so close.
I have them written down.
What are we missing? It's not Florence.
Give me a minute. No, because Florence won't have the conversation about it.
Yeah. Union said no. Park Hills said no.
Park Hills said no.
Saying no means they voted and voted it down to some degree.
Coming back with my notes.
So you forgot Fort Mitchell.
I forgot Fort Mitchell.
All right, with that level.
Okay.
Fort Mitchell.
Wait, Fort Mitchell. Yes. Sorry, Fort Mitchell. 2021. So we had Covington. Yeah.
It's Cold Springs and Crescent Springs.
See?
Yeah, it's not Crestview Hills. All right, we got it.
We got it over again. Okay, 12 cities in Northern Kentucky with fairness ordinances are
Go.
Covington, Maysville, Dayton and Bellevue, Highland Heights, we were at that one, the Highland Heights, Fort Thomas, Cold Spring, Newport, Crescent Springs, Augusta, Ellesmere, and Fort Mitchell. But 12 cities, 12 cities in one county. So 24 cities in one county, 23 cities in one county in all of Kentucky. And we have 12 of those in Northern Kentucky. And I really do attribute that to the leadership and the support of the city of Covington. So they were the ones that set up, like the city administration really put forth to everybody and supported our efforts
but I think
as well.
there were local people in each of those communities who said, yes, let's do this. And then they, and if the fairness ordinance is saying that within our city,
right,
you are protected from discrimination based on housing, public accommodation, and workplace.
Yeah. So I was outed as a high school English teacher, and as a teacher, I taught in two different districts. I taught at a district just north of Cincinnati, and then I taught at a district back in my hometown, my old high school, actually. And in both of those districts, they were fairly rural, and we're talking 2003 to 2008. And I had students come to me every year when I was a high school English teacher who were, questioning their sexual orientation or their gender identity. And I was just a person who supported them. And, I think as I mentioned before, I always knew growing up in the 80s, we didn't have the language. We didn't have the internet. We had the phone on the wall that we could dial and, call our friend. There was no community. There was no way to know. And in the 80s, the only thing you heard was really all about HIV and AIDS and all of the stigma around that. And I grew up, people like, Matthew Shepard was about my age, and Brandon Tina was about my age. And so the people who were my age, who were coming out, it was just that point in time that was, pretty contentious. And so I was living my life in Oxford and teaching, and went back to Northwest Ohio and taught, and was outed. And then it was really through that. It was, how can you be a teacher and have excellent teaching evaluations every year and be one of only 2 teachers in the entire school qualified to teach, AP classes and to care, and then just have it be over just like that. I ultimately left teaching because I was outed. And
so sorry.
Yeah.
So your husband or ex-husband at the time?
Yes.
Outed you to the school district?
Yes. So I
with the intention of getting you fired?
Yes. Well, and I wasn't. I didn't. I was not. I left on my own accord. I left and I went back to Miami University. It's bonkers, really. It's wild what happens in the realm of teachers. And I think that this is the thing. This is not a surprise, but you can get on Google today and type gay teacher in Ohio, and you're going to get an never-ending feed of LGBTQA plus teachers who have been outed and have experienced incredible discrimination. And it typically goes one of 2 ways. They're fired, or they just kind of quietly disappear. So, and then, there's always a spectrum. So when you go to those teeny tiny little schools and everybody knows everybody, when, the president of the school board at that point was somebody I went to high school with, was on the football team with the ex-husband, and the superintendent of the school was his golfing buddy. And they literally felt like I was the first queer person, LGBTQ person, lesbian is what they were saying, that came out of that district. But what we know is that's false, and there are many of us, and it doesn't matter what community we live in. And there were people in my teeny tiny little school district that left just about every year, who are part of our community and are thriving now in different places of the United States that are not Northwest Ohio, as am I. But it was really on the other side of that my mind was sort of blown open to the sort of bias and discrimination that LGBTQA plus people face. It was really hard to walk away from that and to experience that sort of like, how does this happen? And then, I'm a mom. And so to go through the court system, to go through the whole process of figuring out, co-parenting and child support. And I could write another dissertation on the way that they treat mothers who are queer through that system, because they're just the amount of stuff that we went through with the family services, because I was a queer mom, who ended up ultimately leaving. I left my hometown because there were death threats, and because my house was broken into, and because my car was damaged when I was at my son's t-ball game, of all places. And I was lucky to have a supportive community to go back to. And so for me, that was Miami University, because as a non-traditional, college student in my undergrad, I had formed really good relationships with some of my professors, and went back on scholarship for my master's right away, and continued to develop those relationships. And so when I started thinking about a doctoral program prior to all of this happening, Miami was really the only place that I considered, and it was wonderful for me. So it was when I got back in that space and had people who were out and open and fierce and awesome members of the LGBTQA plus community, and people who were amazing allies, who weren't afraid to scream it at the top of their lungs, and who understood how to help me channel my rage into very productive ways and into things like advocacy. And so it was through that, then I got very involved on campus. I was the president of the Graduate Student Queer Alliance at that point, and bounced off of campus pretty quickly. And got involved with just conversations with other educators in Cincinnati, talking to a lot of educators. I wrote a lot about the experiences of LGBTQ educators, particularly in Ohio at that point, and then started doing some of that work in Kentucky as well. But just was, and am still enraged that we can't have out and open LGBTQA plus educators in our schools. If we could have teachers be out and open in our schools, the impact that would make for our kids and for our communities. I still believe that public education is the way that we change the world, but that's what really led me into the work. And then through that, I got involved with Equality Ohio, and I was on the board of Equality Ohio until I met Katie. And then I was living in Covington and working in Covington at that point, and needed to leave the board, and threw all efforts into what we were doing through the Pride Center, essentially because I believe that it's not a belief, it's truth, that so many teachers go through this experience, and so many of us don't make it out in quite the same way that I do. And I'm emotional, and I don't know why, but it's true. It's true that to be a librarian, or to be a teacher, or to be in public service like that, and to be out and open is tough. And so to do my part to make sure whatever small impact I can make in this world, to make sure that less teachers go through that, and kids and college students, then that's what I want to do. Sorry. It's true though. It's so true. No, and it is. It's a passion.
The first group that started organizing Pride NKY Pride got together in 2009 and produced the first event in fall of 2010. And so that was already going, and it was really the bars, a lot of the bar ownership and bar community, Carl and Terry and Diane and Ron Paget and why am I blanking on her name? Patty Herman, and did I say Mikey? These folks came together and through the Angel, through that first festival. The following year, the 2011, it was they moved it to Goble Park. So it was in Goble Park, but it was in June, and then it kind of moved around a little bit. We really got involved in 2012. So, and have been now, I guess we've been doing this for 11 years.
12 years. This will be our 12th. This is the 14th year of NKY Pride. But the interesting thing about when those folks got together in 2009 is that they did so, we read over the original bylaws, And the original bylaws of the original 501c3 just talked about how they hoped someday they would get to the point where they would be able to open a center. This was the goal when they formed the 501c3, when they formed NKY Pride so many, 14 years ago, 15 years ago. They did so with the hope that eventually we would be able to move toward a physical space and that we would be able to move even beyond that and offer things like scholarships to LGBTQ students. So when we had the opportunity and we understood the need, and this is jumping ahead a whole lot of years because in the middle there, we understood the need for the physical space, but it really did start with that group of people who said, we need a physical space. We need our own event because of all of the reasons that we do. And we have really, like, we've kept that in mind over the years as we've continued to do the work.
Yeah, once we figured out how to create a festival that like made money instead of lost money. Yeah, we had a lot of really bad weather and relied on alcohol sales. The model has changed. The model has changed. Mikey Hess was Bar 701 at the time, which is now 32.
And he's back there working again, I believe.
Okay. Angel was the owner of Yada Club, which was like a lesbian bar, a club night.
Yeah.
What's Angel's last name?
Murphy.
Angel Murphy.
Carl and Terry, who you've interviewed. Diane Gamble, now owner of Rosie's.
Ron Paget's.
Ron Paget's.
Ron Paget.
Have you met Ron Paget?
You should. This is Ron.
Ron Paget, one of the original NKY Priders.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. There was like Chuck Beatty, Sean Masters.
Chuck was involved in the first one?
Not in the first one. I'm just thinking over the years
when we got
people
started with it, it's been a whole different group of people since then. But we have had a core group of people that have kept it really rolling, because it was when we got involved, the bars were running bars, which is busy work, and they were just kind of done with trying to keep the festival up and going. And I have had a passion for it. We have a passion for it. And we felt like it was really important that we continue Northern Kentucky Pride. And so we really did get poured on, I think, for about 6 years in a row. And finally figured out the magic of the festival, moved it all around in different spaces and different points in the month, and then found where it worked. And so it was really after that point that we got our groove in 2018 when we added the parade and shortened the festival and moved it to the first Sunday in June, which works, and added the after party and the events before. It just it worked, and I think all of this was in line of where we needed to go. There was a board, but there wasn't a board at that point. So they had a 501c3, but they just kind of turned it over to us. When we walked into Pride in 2013, 2012, Mikey, some of these folks were still involved. We were kind of working together, and then it was the next year that they just kind of turned it over, and we got the paperwork for the 501c3. We got all of the history of it at that point, and we let the 501c3 go because we were such a small group. And so we've operated under a fiscal agent for all of these years. We've operated under a fiscal agent. We're about to stop operating under a fiscal agent as soon as our 501c3 is approved, and we have a board in place now to move forward with the Pride Center. But we really have, I think, just been this kind of like scrappy group of volunteers from Northern Kentucky. We're concentrated. A lot of us are from Covington, but not exclusively. We have folks from all over Northern Kentucky who have been involved in the planning committee over the years and who are involved now with our efforts, not only through the Pride Center, but also through Northern Kentucky Pride.
Yeah.
So Northern Kentucky, I think the magic really did come together when we made the shift. And I think that's been the thing about Northern Kentucky. And I do think that when we made that shift to our first Sunday in June with the parade and all of the other events, like we understand our audience a bit better. We understand our community a bit better and what they're looking for. We want to support what's happening in Cincinnati, but we can't be right up against each other. We need to create a little bit of space in order to, be able to celebrate our communities.
Yeah, and we've always done a number of like smaller events leading up to it.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've done a number of different bike-related events. We've done faith-related events. We do a youth party every year now. We do usually like a pub crawl, or we've been doing a beer release with Braxton that has a drag show. So Pride is the one day, but there's a lot that, surrounds it. And obviously Cincinnati Pride has that model as well. Personally, I'm the chair of the parade. So my job that day is to get everyone in line, and I am always excited to see the parade off. So it's like, we are on time. It's 1 o'clock. Go. And then you see like 1,000 people go down Madison Avenue. And even though it's nothing like the Cincinnati Pride Parade, it's still incredible because there's nothing else in Northern Kentucky like that in terms of that critical mass just like coming down the main corridor of the city and rainbows. And, it's the best moment. And once they go, I'm done for the day.
True. I'm definitely not. But we've been in all variations of this. So since we were involved with Northern Kentucky Pride, we were just like I'm saying, this like small group of committee members, anywhere from 5 to 15 people, depending on the year, have taken up the load of this. So there were some years that I was running the festival. I was the festival chair until this will be my second year not sort of being the festival chair, kind of, but we all worked together. That was the really, I think the cool thing about Northern Kentucky Pride is we were a committee, and we would, pre-parade, the shift, talk about the different areas in the festival that we thought people would be interested in. We tried out different things on the stage. We experimented a lot with this core group of people who they're like, we're still together, we're still doing this. And so I know that, Katie and I, people talk to us a lot about the efforts, and we've been involved for a long time, but there are a crew of people who have dedicated this time to the efforts and to the work here as well. But certainly making that shift to the parade, I think, was more authentic to our community and the sort of celebration that our community, Covington, was looking for. The parade and the festival and the after party and these other events, the smaller events on each side, some of the educational stuff that we offer as well are good. They're good additions, and I think it was a good turn. So AJ Miller is involved with the center now, and AJ is amazing, and he organizes the Pride Festival.
Obviously the built environment is a little bit smaller too, which gives it a feeling, but we also have some huge partners in the faith community with Trinity Episcopal Church and First Christian in Covington and Florence Christian, although. So we start our parade at 1 o'clock because that part of the community was so present in the organizing efforts. We wanted to make sure that they could have their Sunday service first. So I think that's probably a little bit unique. I probably don't get that in every Pride parade. And when we have a competition every year to see who has the best float. We have judges, that kind of thing. And Trinity has won it for 3 years. Well, all 3 years. The best float for all 3 years of the parade, because we didn't do it in 20 because of COVID, and also in 21 because it was still risky for COVID. So, this year there are folks who are coming after Trinity for that prize.
So many groups are like, we're coming for you, Trinity.
I started coming out when I was an undergrad at the University of Kentucky around 2002. And I, just kind of friends and close friends, and got involved with the Lavender Society, which was the name of one of the on-campus organizations. And we did all sorts of fun stuff, like, coming out day celebrations and bad, drag shows. And we made a zine. So I think that's really where my LGBT advocacy began, was the Lavender Society at the University of Kentucky. I've been very, very fortunate to have a supportive family. My dad is the mayor of Covington, and it's pretty clear where he stands on the issue. It doesn't mean that it's not still challenging. I think no matter how great your family is, you still have those fears of disappointing them. Maybe you think they had a different vision for your life. So it's not like everything was easy and perfect. It was complicated in terms of just me kind of getting the confidence to come out. And I moved to New York City and had some wild times there. Just living the dream, being in graduate school and being part of the LGBT community there, living in Chelsea and kind of really developing culture in that way. Is that what it's called? And yeah, so just, did a lot of traveling around and exploring and kind of building that up. I think something that I've started to notice, which this is like a sidebar for, there's a research project here, I really think is young queer people traveling abroad in an attempt to discover themselves and to make, that without my entire, nurture, like who am I in a completely different environment and growing into that and then coming home. So I spent a year in South America traveling by myself and came back in 2008 and moved to Frankfurt. But I think that it's all a process, right? And today it's just not a question. Like I work at Alta Fiber. I chaired the Pride ERG for 2 years. Like my face is on everything. Like there's no like, oh, Katie, is she a lesbian? Yeah. We've passed that. And that's really nice. You get to the other side eventually.
In the time that you've been participating in Northern Kentucky Pride, how do you feel like it's changed? Again,
Oh my gosh, it's gotten so much bigger.
Yeah. I remember I wasn't at the first one. It was freezing. That's what the photos show. It was freezing cold and it was in October. And like fun fact, when we did it on October 1st, the Covington's night out that year, it was
also
literally
freezing.
the coldest day of that entire winter. It snowed on October 1st and it was like 60 in January or something. But it started out very small. I think it's always been kind of scrappy here in Northern Kentucky. We've always started out I think just a small group of people trying to keep it going and getting the buy-in. And it really was, I think, just figuring out what worked best for us. We were pretty intentional of paying attention to what's happening at the other festivals. When is Dayton, Ohio, and when is Lexington, and when is Indianapolis, and when is Columbus. And so paying attention to those dates and then understanding, like, people here like to go out on Sunday mornings. We enjoy Sunday Fun Day. But just making that turn, it really was the year that we added the parade and shortened the festival. We were talking about it this morning. Why in the world we were running a festival from like 10 a.m. until 10 p.m. for those years? I don't know why we were doing that. I think other festivals were doing that, and that's what we thought. It's like taking the step back and thinking about what is actually going to work for us. Some of the liquor license laws changed, which also made it helpful.
Yep.
Because of and you should talk about that.
Well, I don't know.
I mean, it helped in terms of like the money that we were putting into the festival and what
I think
we
we're
were getting
talking
back out
about
of
the
it.
logistics of planning the festival. I think more like when
It
did
changed it,
the
though.
organizations start? When did we start to get buy-in from the community organizations? Like first we had some of the smaller nonprofits, and
That's
then it
true.
kind of grew,
Yeah.
and you got like the Children's Home of Northern Kentucky, and you started to get bigger organizations, and then you
We
got
had
the
Toyota
banks and
come in.
Toyota.
Yeah, we had Toyota
We
come
can
in.
see kind of the history of the sponsors.
It really, you're right. It really was
Yeah.
when we started making that shift. And Toyota, when we got those bigger sponsors, came in and talked about how much they loved our festival, because they still do.
Yeah, I mean, look
Yeah.
at back in 2014, we had the Fairness Campaign, Pipers, Rosie's, Wessex. I mean, these are all like, that is not a lot of sponsors.
So it really was. It was 2015 then when U.S. Bank and Toyota came on.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about, I think, Northern Kentucky Pride is that we have some of our, not all, but some of our corporate and community, most of our corporate and community sponsors also are part of our planning committee. So there is some involvement there.
Mhm.
But Toyota loved it. They loved our festival. They loved when they were here in Northern Kentucky. And then the word kind of spread from there. U.S. Bank has been a big supporter since since then, more supporters now than we had. But we are, I think we're more heavy on local. So like I said, U.S. Bank, Amy Robinson is the treasurer on our board. She served with us on this committee as about as long as we have. And she's a rep from U.S. Bank. And, Hotel Covington is incredible with their support of what we're doing here. And the NKY is a huge sponsor, and
they have representation
on our committee. So it really, I think it was kind of building out this community buy-in and support. And then the event is a lot of fun. And then the commitment to the 365 days a year. So even before we had the space, we were still doing that work around fairness ordinances and education and consulting in different spaces and schools and offering trainings and workshops. So, but I think 2018 is really when it made that turn and created what was authentic and natural to Northern Kentucky. And we'll celebrate. Augusta is having their first event this summer on June 3rd, and we'll be in Augusta to celebrate their first festival as well here in Northern Kentucky. So the Pride Center, I think I don't need to jump into a bunch of detail around here, but I served as the founding director of the Office of LGBTQ Programs and Services at Northern Kentucky University. I started there in 2013. I left about a year ago, left in 2022. Yes. I've been gone for a year. And it was really through that work. I had a lot of success at NKU. We did a lot of work to develop community, and pretty quickly we started receiving recognition for the work that was happening on campus. When that happened, what I found was people who were looking for support, who were part of the LGBTQA plus community, or were parents, a lot of parents who were parenting adult and younger kids who were looking for resources and support. At this point, by the time I was finishing my tenure at NKU, 25% of our student population was self-disclosing that they were part of the LGBTQ community. We saw that happening with the additional fairness efforts in Northern Kentucky. All of this was coming together, and there was just so much momentum. And my phone was ringing all the time on campus because people would, jump on the internet and look for where the LGBTQ support was coming from, and there were no centers. And so they were coming to me at the university, and I was generally most years an office of one, had student help and had, I had a coordinator a couple of years, but I was fielding a lot of these calls, and we understand here in Northern Kentucky, and especially now more than ever with the legislation that Frankfurt passed, the river is big, and the river can be exceptionally big for things like insurance coverage to just bounce across the river. So there are so many wonderful resources in Cincinnati, and not accessible to all folks in Northern Kentucky. And so we know that there are so many affirming, like we keep saying, radically affirming providers and caregivers and restaurants and organizations and support systems in place for LGBTQA plus people. And so the mission of the Northern Kentucky Pride Center, we're all volunteers. And that's just the way that it is for the moment. I mean, ultimately we would love to grow into a place where we could hire somebody, at least part-time, to come in and help, because we all think that the need is going to continue to grow, particularly with trans kids at the moment. So this was just all coming together. The need was massive. We had such a big need on campus that's where I had to focus my energies during the workday, but understanding that we have all of these people across Northern Kentucky, we just need a space to pull together these resources, the people resources and the resources for help and the access to the care that LGBTQA plus Northern Kentuckians need. And it was right about then that this building was came available, and we have a really good deal in a way that is very sustainable for this space. It's quite small, but it works. I think it works well for what we're trying to do. And so I think people will see now that certainly we've begun rolling out regular monthly programming. We have monthly programming scheduled, throughout the rest of the year, but continuing to add that programming. So support for families and trans kids, especially in LGBTQA youth, and making sure that we're providing whatever help and resources we can for aging LGBTQ Northern Kentuckians and things like testing. And so we're really just this space where we can pull together these resources.
Well, it started in 2019. And then there were some challenges called 2020. And so most of the programming has been late 2021, 2022, and now going this year. Yeah.
So starting in the summer of last year, we started staffing a day in the center, and now we're open every Friday. We have meetings in here on Saturdays. So, and then building out that additional programming. So now we're open every week and continuing to build some programming and in all different ways. Cool. So when I met her, she lived there.
I mean, my dad owns the building.
It's true. Joe owns the building. But when Katie and I met, she lived on the second floor of Esperanza there. And I loved this building. I thought this building looked great. I just always did. I thought this would be a great space for a Pride Center. And just always kind of kept my eye on the space as a possible spot for the Pride Center. So,
what was this before?
Dragon's Hoard.
So it was an office right before us, but right before that, it was
like literally like Ren Fair, like retail,
which was the best spot. It was perfect.
A tiny little castle with you could
so
get.
It's always been gay.
Yes. Yeah, but no, it is not a city-owned building. We rent from Joe.
Yeah,
and so we have a very good rate.
That's good.
You know, I think just something I'll add, and then whatever you want to add is we've worked really well with Cincinnati Pride over the years. Michael Brooklyn was showing up at our festival when it was pouring down rain, and bringing people and emceeing. I mean, it was just such a big part of helping us to create that buy-in. We answer a lot of questions every year. I'm sure, I don't know if it happens on both sides of the river, but every year we get asked the question about, so why Northern Kentucky Pride? Why a Pride, in Northern Kentucky and Covington when there's a Pride in Cincinnati? And it's like we say, we're Kentucky, we're not Ohio. And so now, we're dealing with 150 and the fallout from some of this legislation and how it's going to impact our schools. And so we're really focused on those efforts. And for that reason, we do need to celebrate our community, and we do have different advocacy needs depending on the year. And we like to focus it in on that.
I think looking backwards, like what a miss it would be to never have created it and just said like, we'll all just be part of Cincinnati Pride. Yeah. Cincinnati Pride's amazing, but what a huge miss it would have been in the way that we can advocate for good policy in Frankfort and for good legislators and inclusive, culture. If I think that for not having Northern Kentucky Pride, we could have created more of a distance between the big liberal city and Northern Kentucky, where I don't know. I don't. This is a new thought, but it would have been a miss for our region to have been just kind of the afterthought of the big city, and so I don't think when you look backwards, there's anyone who would say that it's duplicative or unnecessary, because it does serve a purpose. Yeah. And just looking at the politics of it, there are 3 state representatives from Northern Kentucky who are all Republicans, who all voted against the anti-trans legislation. Yeah. And there's no doubt that the culture up here influenced that. And, not everything is about what happens politically. The senators didn't do that. But, I don't think they would have thought much of a constituency if they didn't see, thousands of people come out for Northern Kentucky Pride, or the importance of the LGBT community on the river cities. And
the beautiful thing about our community is because we are, I think, a little bit smaller, and we're, at least our event, that Pride Festival is here in Covington, is what we get back from the businesses. So even Golden Gelato is just down the down the street here, and they love Northern Kentucky Pride. They say it's one of their favorite days of the entire year. They do really good businesses. And we've really made the case for just the success of the festival in the city and the sort of energy and the sort of support that comes from that. I love Covington in June because the pride flags are everywhere. We live a little over a mile from here. We live out in the Austinburg neighborhood, and the flags are everywhere. So driving out to Pieselburg or going out to like South Covington or clearly up here in more of the core area, I love that. And it's not just LGBTQA plus people. These are allies. This is just part of the fabric of who we are here in Covington. The Economic Development Department has written it into their plan. And like, it is the fabric of who we are as a city. And it's been awesome to see this spread across Northern Kentucky and the energy and the excitement across. We're going to continue to see this grow across Northern Kentucky. We do. So we were married in 2012. And so when we were married in 2000, we got married in New York City because Katie had gone to grad school there, and it was the only state that we had any sort of connection to. So we got married in New York
in
Central Park at Ladies Pavilion, and came back, and I started working at NKU in 2013. And it was interesting to fill out all of those documents, those new hire documents where you're married, but it doesn't matter because the government doesn't see you as such. And so we owned Pike Street Lounge just down the street right after we were together. And it was an everybody bar, but it was a queer space. And so we were at Pike Street Lounge when the Windsor case passed for when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of that. And so we celebrated that, the recognition of marriage nationally, but still not here in Kentucky was a thing. And so I will never forget when marriage equality actually passed. I was at NKU. I was in my office. There was nobody there. I was all by myself. And I didn't even realize how emotional I would be about it. And you were at work. You were at City Hall.
Yeah.
And I was watching it on the SCOTUS blog, and it passed, and I was just like, it passed. And I called, and we were on the phone together. I'm like, cool. What do you say? And then that was kind of it.
Yeah.
And then I like ran around like looking for somebody to celebrate with, and ran into a couple of people, and they were like, what? And I'm like, marriage equality. And they're like, cool. Yeah. And then we, a lot of us ended up at Wonder Bar that night and celebrated that night. But yep.
I was in a cubicle. I remember where I was when you called, and I was like in an environment where everybody could hear me. So I was like,
we're married. Cool.
Yeah.
We did a lot of fun things on campus with it as well. Like we did the screening, and then we brought Obergefell to campus. But it was cool to see how things shifted after that. I think we were talking about this earlier as well. Every time we see big progress, we also see some backlash, and so that was great. We always felt like this is awesome. There's still 1,000 things that we need to worry about instead. Like, let's talk about the trans kids, and let's talk about, the Black folks and the Black trans women and like all these other issues. And, but you have to stop and celebrate those wins. And we did. And then what happened after 2015? So, so just, continuing that. So, the only other thing that we didn't mention that might be worth mentioning is the city of Covington was the first city in all of Kentucky that passed a ban on conversion therapy for kids, for minors. So I think I'll just say like another notable thing about the city of Covington and the leadership, and this was something that happened in 2020, but we worked on this for a year and a half, at least prior to this happening. I work with the city of Covington on their municipal equality index. The Pride Center does works with the city of Covington on their municipal equality index, and we were thinking through for years about other ways that the city could be very proactive in the support for LGBTQA plus people here in Northern Kentucky, and took the initiative to pass the first ban on conversion therapy for minors in all of Kentucky. And that passed in March of 2020, right after the world shut down. And so it was sort of like, a big celebration, but we couldn't celebrate with that. But I think, as I'm just sitting here reflecting on the other things that have happened after the city of Covington put that through with no issues, they passed it. There was a lot of support for it. Then we saw Lexington and Louisville follow suit. So I talk about allyship a lot and the difference between being an ally and being an accomplice. And I think more than ever, we need people to stand up and be an accomplice. And by definition, accomplice means that we're a partner in crime. We're in this together. So especially, places like Covington and Dayton and Bellevue and Fort Thomas and Florence, all of these places where we have really great supportive allies, now is the time for our allies and for members of the LGBTQA plus community, if we're in the position to really stand up and be vocal. We need to register to vote, and we need to pay attention to those individuals who will vote for our lives or against our lives. And we just saw this play out in Frankfurt. And I think that as we're looking forward to the next 10 years in Kentucky, this is what matters more perhaps than ever before when we're talking about LGBTQA plus people is register to vote, pay attention to what's happening, and our allies. Now's the time. Now is the time to stand up and be accomplices and to use your voices and to put yourself out there, because you're in a position where so many other LGBTQA plus people can't. And our kids, especially our trans kids, need the support more than ever. So that's really where we need to begin, I think, with the work in Northern Kentucky is that action-based work moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big picture. Looking specifically at what the region has to offer, I think we need alternative healthcare options. There's a monopoly with a Catholic-based hospital system that creates challenges. I think we could handle even more of our Northern Kentucky cities standing up and supporting fairness. I think our school districts, they're receiving a lot of mandated anti-LGBT policy from the state, and that's going to be harmful in the future. It wasn't that many weeks ago that we thought drag might be banned in Kentucky. Like, are you kidding me? And so there was that conversation was already starting among how are we going to handle this? And I think to the accomplice point, that needs to be how people feel about what's happening with trans youth, in terms of how our city's going to handle this. How are we going to provide health care? How are we going to navigate this? I think that's the number one priority.
So just think about this as if it was your kid or your brother or your sister or your mom or your dad. If you're an ally and you saw this sort of harm happening to your family, approach this as this is something that could be happening to somebody that I care about. And what would I do if it was somebody that I care about? And take action.
Yeah, well, you've always had, students wanting to go to Equitas Health, right?
Yeah, I do.
But
I do.
And just navigating what you're, if you're a Medicare or Medicaid and state bound, the different things that could prevent you from having access to Cincinnati's healthcare resources.
Right.
And you only have one choice.
Right.
In Northern Kentucky.
Yeah. So definitely that. And now we see with the new legislation in Kentucky that trans kids will have to detransition within a year. They've essentially outlawed being a trans kid in Kentucky. And so even with what's happening at Cincinnati Children's Trans Clinic, our Kentucky kids need to get to the clinic. So the conversations that are happening at the state level right now that we're involved in on how can we support especially trans kids on the other side of all of this policy, and talking about things like scholarships to support families to get their kids across state lines. I mean, there's just a lot more work that needs to be done moving forward to support these families and these kids.